Hello, my people. How are you? I hope you're all doing fine. I'm also good. And for anyone who is new to this place, my good name is Leah or Latez. I'm Latez Njagi, and I'm happy and excited to be back here. If you're new to this place, you're so much welcome. This is a place where we come have fun. It's a place we come talk. It's a place we come enlighten each other on issues concerning life. And I feel it has been long since I came here for some talks. I think I've been too much on vlogs and all that. I've been having a lot that has been going on into my life. I've been having a lot in my life, and I had to give them the time they deserved. And in this life, we all make breaks each now and then. But I feel the break is enough. I feel the break was important. And now we're back to our normal back-to-back teachings. We need to keep encouraging ourselves. We need to keep learning. And we need to keep looking at life together. And in that manner, today has been a Sunday. And I went to church. And when I was in church, or maybe when I was just seated in church, there's a lot that was triggering in my mind. And as I told you that we come here to talk about life issues, things that happen into our day-to-day life. And there's this thing that came into my mind. I usually worship at Deliverers Umoja under the leadership of Bishop Maside. This is a church that I've loved, and I had enough reasons for me to make that place my church. I don't know what we ever consider before we make a certain place a church, or maybe a place of worship, or maybe before you get to decide that from today I'll be worshiping in this and this place. And I got to remember when I left campus, and now I came to Nairobi, because immediately after campus I came to Nairobi. If there's one thing that I struggled with, is getting a church that I would settle in, getting a place where I would call church and feel so comfortable. And I have some friends of mine who we had the same issue. And before we got to settle onto a certain church where we felt we so okay with, we hoped to different churches. You would find us this Saturday we are in this church, the other Saturday we are in this church, until to a point we were like, this is where we want to make our church. And it was very important, because you have to be comfortable and you have to have reasons why you have settled into a certain church. And today was a very lovely day at church. We were actually celebrating 50 years of service of J.B. Maside. And this is a man of God that I really love. It's a man of God who I can see his teachings have spoken to me personally. His teachings have gotten me from one level to another. And whatever came in mind actually is, there's this notion that people have nowadays that, church is not a must. I no longer go to church. According to how at times I see people who go to church behave, I just made a decision to not be going to church. A church is sijui a heart, sijui the heart of a person is the church. See, I don't know how those phrases, how people put those phrases. And to some point, there are some people who really neglected this art of going to church. And there's some people who speak so ill about someone, identifying themselves to a certain church and such like. And I'm not here to like being against anyone, but one thing I can say is, there are so many people who maybe have left churches because of other people. There are so many people who maybe stopped going to church because of I don't know what. Everyone who doesn't go to church, they have a certain reason which they usually accompany they are not going to church with. And when you get to reason on most of them, they are non-issues, they are unlogical. There are things that at times you did sit down and call them an issue. Because one thing I get to say is that churches are so many, denominations are so many. And you can't tell me that amidst all the denominations, amidst all the churches, maybe there are evangelicals, there are these Pentecostal, there are any churches are so many. There's no you can tell me that amidst all those churches, there's not even one which you ever identified yourself with and you said, I think I'm okay with the teachings of this church. I think I'm okay with the leadership of this church. I think I'm okay with the way these people worship and such like. There is no way you can convince me that. There's no way you can come and convince me that all churches are bad. I can't start and defend churches because there are churches that we have seen lead people astray. There are churches who they just have the word church, but in reality they are cults and all that. There are people who have established like businesses and named them churches. That's for a fact. That is something that we can't like run away from. But all the same, in the contrary, there are men of God who have established places of worship where people go there and they get to connect with their gods. There are some people who really respect the house of God. There are men of God who really are so passionate about the work of God. So one thing that I can never get to admit is that you in your locality, wherever you stay and such like, you have searched for a church or for a place of worship and you have lacked. And you can't tell me that each and every church that is surrounding you is corrupt. At each and every church that is in your surrounding is not worth for worshiping and such like. That is one thing that I can never get to admit. Churches are many, but let me tell you, if you want to just settle into a church, even make it a prayer item, that the Holy Spirit will always lead you. If you really are a lover of God, if you really are desperate about getting a church that is so straightforward in its teachings, church that is up to the standards, I'm sure you'll get it. I'm sure you'll get one. What we do is that we just so ignorant. We just have this tendency, especially in this generation that we are at, we just don't care. And we continue with this fallacy of, you know what, actually the church people are like this and these, you know, the people who go to church are the ones that don't and all that. But in real sense, that's just a scapegoat. It's just an excuse because you don't want to go to church. At times I always say, make your own decisions and just keep quiet. Other than you keep on telling us on how people who go to church are bad and such like, but you personally experience it yourself. And one thing I always say is that we go to church for many reasons, for very many reasons. In a congregation, in a church setup, everyone who is there, they got to wake up in the morning and they prepared and they said, you know, today I'll be going to a certain church. There's a reason within them that made them to go to church. You know, when we were at our younger age, it's when we used to go to church like as a mandatory or like an obvious thing. But we are in that age and that there is an age that we get to, and you don't just go to church. You go to church with a reason and with a purpose. So one thing we need to know is that everyone who is in a church, that's why at times when someone gets to judge maybe church goers or maybe Christians or maybe people who go to church or leaders in church and that's right, because of behaviors of certain people, it fails to be logic. Because we all go to church because of various reasons. So that is one thing that always makes me say that I'll never stop going to church because I don't know leaders are corrupt, because I don't know people are not preaching the right gospel, because I'll choose a church that I'm comfortable with it, and then I'll know that I've gone there with my own personal reasons. Because we always say that God is always concerned about our hearts and He knows each and everyone's heart. So if you go innocently to the church with your own reason, which maybe is to worship God, which maybe it's to get the word's nourishment, or maybe it's just the meeting of brethren and such like, God looks at the hearts. You don't be focused about the neighbor or maybe the other person, whatever they came to do in church. There are people who are nowadays in church just to hide because they are just corrupt, they're just ill, they're just They are the worst people you'd ever meet here outside, but they are in church to hide. And now because they are there, that one cannot hinder me not to go to church. I think that is what we're doing. We are failing to go to church because of other people who are into church, because of their other motives. We know what's the essence and the importance of church, and we know why people go to church. That we know. So this other person who is coming with another agenda other than what we know should not make you who have the right agenda to go to church. A certain pastor had a certain scandal somewhere, and now because of that thing, tell us that you don't go to church. You tell us that you no longer go to church. Hey, we always say that every tongue shall confess and every knee shall bow. Him, with his scandals and his deceit and his evil doctrines, he'll be judged alone, and you also be judged alone. And what I would like us to urge us is, church is a personal decision. We all know what we go to get in church. And also, if at all you were following a certain church or a certain pastor and such like, and maybe they start behaving in ways that you're not comfortable with, you're not restricted from going to look for another place of worship. Church is not like a family that if I'm born in the family of Njagi, that to death I will remain the Njagis. Church is not the same. Right now, I might be worshiping in a certain church. If at all issues start arising from that church and I feel leaders have become so evil and such like, and I feel maybe the leadership and maybe the pastors and the reverends there are doing this that are not okay, I'm not prevented from getting out of that place and joining another place. That's what we always forget. Look for a place that you're comfortable, but don't fail to go to church just because of a certain reason. No, places of worship are so many. Churches are so many. We are not restricted by anyone. You never got born again and you're told that, or maybe you never got to know about God and you're told that you are restricted to a certain church. Imagine we are at freedom, we are at liberty. The greatest issue here is we should at least be going to church. It's very important, by the way, to go to church. And I'm here to speak to each and every to someone who is there, or I know you're there. I know of many people who don't go to church. Many. Someone you get to ask them the last time they attended church and they're like, I got some years. Some people actually the last time they attended church was when they were in their mothers or in their parents' upbringing, or it's when they were at the control of their parents. That's the last time they went to church. And it's because the parents used to monitor whether they are going to church or not. And maybe from the time you got from your mother's environment, where maybe your mom, your dad used to see you, you've never gotten to have that personal initiative to get to have you got. There's nothing that is important like having a God that you term as you got. Some of us, they still in the even in prayers and such like, they believe in God of their mother, God of their grandmother, of which it's not bad. But there's an age you are getting to, you need to now start having a God you can call yours. Yes, my God. Because it's a God you have walked a journey with. It's a God you have seen do. It's a God you can testify of a journey you've walked with him. And in the same, it's good to have a tendency at times of going to church. There is a lot of covering one gets when he or she is in a church setup. There's a lot of advantages at times we get by just that tendency, of being in a certain church. Being that you are at a certain pastor, you are at a certain reverend, and a certain bishop and such like, it's such an advantage. And that's why you always see, just maybe even by the general things, Do you know, if at all you get to, if at all you want to have a wedding, it must be initiated by a pastor. If at all you have to, even in death, a burial ceremony, it must be conducted by a pastor. You usually get that most of the times, even people are getting to die, you don't have a pastor you can identify yourself with. You have to go even look for that pastor of your home church, or maybe the pastor of your mother or of your father, because you don't have a pastor you can identify yourself with, because you don't belong anywhere. The last time you went to church is when you were at home. And I don't know where this tendency came from. And people no longer love church. And the reasons people don't love church are so unlogic. I'm like urging us to have a behavior of having a church. Identify yourself with a certain church. Just be attending church services. At times you may not be able to attend even if it's every Sunday. But even if you miss the Sunday, next Sunday, try and be there. Even in the Bible, in the book of Hebrews chapter 10, I think verse 25, we see Paul, it's a letter of Paul. We see Paul even urging brethren that you should not forfeit the meeting of brethren, as that those are the words of Paul, as most of you are in the habit of doing. Because even then, the people used to have that tendency. They used to have this tendency of not meeting up in those gatherings of brethren. Yes, we have been at times. Meet up with, there are some things that you'll get to know only if you go to church. There's some things you get to, some routines you get to have when you go to church. There are some behaviors you get to have when you go to church. And maybe to touch with, what are some of the advantages that we get? Or why should I sit here and urge someone to go to church? We're not even asking for much. Yes, you're not born again. Yes, you even don't have that strong connection with God. But the bare minimum, just attending a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour service, I think that is not much to ask, because it's very key and it's very important. What are some of the advantages? One and foremost, as I've said, is that issue of having, at least you have identified yourself with a certain church, that even if you have something, maybe you even get to build a house, you have a housewarming, you have at least a pastor you can call, you get to buy a car, you have a pastor who can come and dedicate your car to God, you get to have children, maybe kids dedication, at times you are even getting married and such like, you have a pastor. Even in burial, at least you have a pastor who can bury you, because these are things that they have to involve a pastor. And there's a certain blessing that comes from men of God. And as I started by saying, not everyone here maybe who have a church, or maybe who call themselves a pastor, who are men of God. That's for a fact. That's for facts. We are not here to judge or to do anything, but you'll get to know a man of God by even how he speaks and how he carries himself out. So as I said, that's the first thing you do. Ask God to give you wisdom. Ask God to give you that. You ask the Holy Spirit to lead you. That at all times you'll be able to identify someone you can call a man of God, and someone who is maybe just a cult, who is just in a certain cult, who just want to like lure people, maybe to just take advantage of their finances and all that. So first and foremost, that is one of the advantage. At least you can stand and call someone, this is my pastor. That even if you just want a covering at a certain given time, someone you can just call, and or someone you can just approach as your pastor. And something else that is an advantage of maybe going to church and such like is, at times, our nourishment as human beings. We human beings, there's a nature of us, as much as we get to nourish ourselves with physical food, we also need the spiritual nourishment. And most of these, we can only get it in church, because not most of us will have this behavior of maybe getting to read the word when we're at home, or maybe getting to have Bible studies and such like when we are out of church setup and such like. So a church is a place where we get spiritual nourishment. Church is a place where we get to learn spiritual doings. We get to learn spiritual aspects. We get to know the word. We get revelation of the word. You know, one thing that myself, I can say that going to church has helped me with is the revelation of the words. There's a word I'll just read when I'm here at home, and I get to understand it in a certain way. But the same word, a certain man of God or woman of God will go into into the altar and get to speak about it, and he'll give you a different revelation of it, and it will relate so much onto your life. And this is something that at times makes me to go to church, because I want a new revelation. I want a new understanding of the words, because God will always give interpretation of the word differently. And when God is giving the word to those men of God, it will always be interpreted differently unto them. And at times, there's a word which you have heard maybe since you were young, and it has never gotten to you in a certain manner. And one day you just been to church, and the man of God gets to stand there and he gets to preach about it, and it gets to speak to you in a different manner. I don't know whether one there are some words that there are certain preachings that I relate to until today. Some which were spoken even I don't know 3 years ago, but that word you carry it into your life, and it like speaks to you every time. Whenever you're into a situation, you relate back to a preaching you ever had somewhere. Like myself, there's a certain preaching that I there's a certain preaching. It was a preaching that was ever made on a weekly, these weekly evening prayers. Still in our church in Deliverance, there's a certain preaching that JB Maside ever preached. It was on 2019, and it was on a time that I was going through a lot. And there's a word that he preached. Until now, the notes I wrote on that day, I usually, after some time, I usually go and get to read them. I usually get to go there and read the scriptures that he preached to on that day. And there's something that I carried from that day. And I know most of the people we have ever interacted know about it. And that is a word that spoke to me that time. It turned around my life that time. And I have carried it along until today. And even today, there's a word that it also like touched me somewhere. And it like kicked me an inch higher. I just love how at times the revelation of the word, it gets to like jumpstart you. It gets you from a certain comfort zone, and it keeps you going. It's like quicken that like pace you had with life. At times it quickens it. So that's why I'm telling you that going to church at times we get a lot of spiritual nourishment. At times you go to church, and these men of God, there are some of them who are so powerful in that manner that there's a prayer they usually make, and you tap it according to the anointing. And let me tell you, never despise the anointing of a man of God. You tap it, and you like that, those declarations at times these men of God make, and you tap it and you just believe in it, and it works unto your life. Me, I'm one person who can testify of it. You just start by it, and it works for you. So there's a lot of nourishment, spiritual nourishment that we get by going to church. A lot. At times you're going through a situation that you cannot be able even to pray for yourself, but you go to God. But you go to church. You get a man of God who will be like dedicating issues, praying for the sick, praying for the downhearted and all that. And in that wave, when the Spirit of God will just be hovering all over that church, you get to be blessed in that service. You can never go to church and just leave the praise out like that, unless the praise you go to is not a lead church. So a lot of spiritual nourishment we get there's a lot of spiritual nourishment we get in church. something that we cannot just ignore like that. A lot. I cannot just be able to explain all of it. At times, you have even ever got yourself that you have gone through issues in life. Even you no longer have faith. Your faith have really deteriorated. You're to a point that you even don't believe in the existence of God. But the man of God goes and speaks a word. It gets you even into tears. It gets you even wondering, why was I doubting this God? And there's a lot. There's a lot we get by going to God. And also, something else that also lies in spiritual nourishment is this art of worshiping and praising God. We always say that God dwells in the worship of his people. He dwells in the praises of his people. At times you cannot be able to maybe praise and worship when you're just alone in the house. At times maybe it becomes hard. But when you are in the presence of God and he says that he dwells where 2 or 3 are gathered, he is always in the midst. You can imagine now we are gathered in the fellowship of God, we are worshiping, your presence. God is in the presence. And it's always very key and very important to be in the presence of God. You can, those are the times where every prayer you get to pray, there's breakthrough, there is connection, and you get to connect with the heavens. So this act of getting a platform or praising and worship, it's also something that should take you to church. It gets to nourish you. It gets to uplift your spirit. It gets to connect you to the spirit. It gets you to have breakthrough. So in this aspect of spiritual nourishment, there's a lot that is unto it. And this is something that should always take us to church. And also something else that an importance of going to church is just the general life encouragement. You know, there are a lot of teachings that happens in church. I don't know whether in the church you attend to, there's these times that you get that the preacher is speaking about spiritual matters, but there are times even other teachings are usually made, even teachings about finances. You get teachings maybe about parenting, we get teachings about marriage, we get a lot of teachings in church. Other than just the normal spiritual things, there are a lot of other teachings that are usually made in church. At times, you know, when you are grown up now, you're no longer in school, where maybe you always get teachings here and there. Some of these things you always get to learn them in church. You get to be reminded. Some of them, they are things that you know, but you get to be reminded about them. It's in church you get to hear things and you're like, yeah, I needed to hear that. There are life teachings that are always taught in church. So other than the spiritual things, there are a lot of things that we get to learn in church. And also something else, in church is where we get to hear of testimonies and we get to relate onto things that God has done to people. And when we get to read in the Bible, we get to read a lot of things that miracles that Jesus used to do and such like. So we relate so much on things that used to happen. This is also something that happens in church. In church, you'll get to hear of life issue testimonies. Somebody will start there and they will get to testify of what God has done for them. And maybe you're in the same scenario and you get to believe, if so and so God did for them, I think he can, I get to believe that he can also do it for me. So you get to hear of people testify. You get to hear of people speak of literally life issues that they have been through, and God has just upholded them and they came out victorious. It's when you get to hear people who have done wondrous things and you're like, oh, so God can give people such. You get to hear of miracles that God have done. You get to hear of people who have been sick for durations and God has healed them. You get to hear of people who have achieved a lot. They have built houses, they have bought big cars, they have started big businesses. You get to see, you know, at times you get to believe that some things are attained by people who are not in church and such like. And when you just in church and you see a man of God, a man who is filled of the Spirit, get to testify of things that God has done for them, you get to desire to love God more. You get to desire to follow God more, because you know there are people who have followed God, who have been so faithful to God, and things have been attached to them. So it gets to encourage us, because you hearing testimonies that are real, not things that were done in the times of the Bible, things that are now happening as at now, things that you can relate to in human nature. So I think that those are the many things. And also there's this aspect of prayers that we can get to admit is You cannot be going to church each and every Sunday and you fail to know how to pray, because you always be hearing people pray. You always be in the midst of people who are praying and such like. Because I'm one person who have witnessed people in adulthood and they don't know to pray. That is the first indication that those people don't go to church. There's no way you can be, you go to church, you go to fellowships, and you don't know how to pray. No, it's hard. So one thing that you always get to know that someone does not go to church, those people don't know how to pray. You will be in a gathering somewhere and they will be told, so and so, please pray for us. You get to realize those people don't know to pray. Because some of these things you get to know them in church. And it actually is so embarrassing. At this age, you are 30 and you're told in a gathering to lead people with prayers and you don't know, just because you don't go to church. Some of these simple things, you get to learn them in church. It's in church where you get to hear how people pray. You know what starts and how people introduce prayers, how people pray, how people conclude prayers. Maybe the kind of such like you get to learn them, not directly, but because it has gotten into your ears each now and then until it has become a routine. So it becomes so easy. Some of these things of even reading the word and such like, there's a lot of routines that are spiritually related that we get to learn by going to church. And also there's also this thing of myself. Let's say I'm a mom and I have this tendency of going to church. I expect my children will follow up the same because they have seen their mom going to. That's why it happens to us that most of us maybe left church when they got out of that maybe when they got out from their parents' surrounding and such like, because our parents used to make us to go to church. Let your children also go to church because you go to church. Even if there's no other reason that will make you to go to church because you have your children. Take them there. There's a lot that they will gain by going to church. I always say that train up a child by the right ways, and they will not depart from it when they get to grow up. So even if you not go to church because of any other reason, just go to train that young one of yours, and you'll be happy to see her follow the right way. There's no parent who ever wishes or desires their children to go astray, their children to be in worldly things and such like. It's the happiness of each and every parent to see their children grow up in ways that are godly. And where would they get to know these things if they don't go to church? And who will take them to church if you as the parent you're not there to take the charge of taking them to church? So even if there's no other reason that will make you go to church, please go because of that ritual one that you're bringing up. They will love church because you love church. This is something that I can speak from witness. I have seen my mom go to church from when I got to know myself. And until this moment, she still challenges me of going to church. There's no single day my mom will call me on a Sunday and ask me, did I go to church? I have like my older sister who, in one or another, she also mentors me in issues of spiritual and such like. It's on a Sunday, she will always be like, have you gone to church? Have you left church? They keep on challenging you on this issue of church because they know the advantage of it. So even if you're not doing it for your own self, do it for that person you're mentoring. Because in one or another, you may not know that you're mentoring them, but you are, indirectly or directly. That's enough for now. I'm one person at times who can speak until I have spoken all. And that's enough for today. And until next time, bye bye. Love you. And in case you're not subscribed, kindly consider subscribing. Bye.